Howdy, all you delicious people. I am here today to go out of my way to review the very first season of YouTube Red's Cobra Kai. So, ultimately, a lot of people will remember quite possibly the very first movie, Karate Kid. If you do not know Karate Kid, then you don't know what the F this is. But ultimately, you will, and honestly and truly, get a breakdown of the Karate Kid movie within this show. Basically, they go out of their way to use snippets and little things of the movie within the show. So ultimately, if you don't know what Karate Kid is, or if you haven't seen Karate Kid in a very long time, this show will go out of its way to help you understand who these characters are if you don't remember the original Karate Kid film. Let's go into talking about this season in a very cryptic like sense. Then we'll get into spoilers. I might ultimately do a little bit of lead up, a little bit talking about this season, and kind of then going off to a cliffhanger because ultimately, um, probably people have either heard about this show, know what the show is about, or this and that. So, reasonably, within trailers, I might talk about some of the stuff that happens within the trailers. I think people would honestly know how this has gone through some trailers and this and that. So, this movie is, of course, the what is really just the aftermath of the Karate Kid, the very first movie, just years later. I know that there were probably several sequels after the Karate Kid, but I think ultimately, like, we're probably gonna easily and quickly probably forget about most of those because reasonably, I think we're not probably gonna go into the sequels. It's probably just gonna mostly tie into the very first film because I don't think they're gonna be using legitimate footage anywhere else. I think at some point though there is a reference to one of the sequel movies at some point, but most of the time it does really just go into the very first film as a bulk of the references that it really uses. So we go into this, and ultimately we have Daniel Larusso and we have Johnny Lawrence. God, it seems like when these two, when these two have to come face to face, man, does the world in such a way want these two to ultimately just there's tons of act of God things that is going on to force these people to ultimately want to look one another in the eye and ultimately just really start to eventually begin again to hate one another. Ultimately, we have it to where in this show, we of course have it via the story of Cobra Kai. Because ultimately, for a very slow portion of this film, it's just kind of Daniel just kind of just appearing from time to time. But then towards more of the series, we actually have Larusso's real eventual what he's doing this season, and eventually we get like a slow okay, now LaRusso is gonna chime in on this season, and he has something to bring to the table to maybe go up against Cobra Kai. Maybe trying to talk about this as much as very cryptic as ways we can go out of our way to do so. Ultimately, the Russo is of course, for trailer purposes, he is a very much car dealer. He ultimately is a person that is just kind of very much seemingly through most of his life been a winner. Seemingly after the winning karate tournaments, it ultimately feels like he has been just like a winner just all of his life. Johnny Lawrence's character has not gotten that lucky. Even when, dare say, his father is like Daddy Warbucks and this and that, it seems like Johnny has really very much, even though he might have been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he has fallen down a lot of tree branches along the way to the bottom of making his way to the ground. From the tree falling all the way down, smacking some branches along the way. Ultimately, is it is interesting enough that the love interest in the Karate Kid movies, of course, could not be able to be on this show. I can understand why, because ultimately I'm sure the love interest in the Karate Kid show or the Karate Kid movies ultimately would be moving on to doing other projects and probably not being able to be able to work on this show. It is kind of disappointing and like, like they could have actually just kind of really cemented. But when looking at it, LaRusso ultimately kind of um, moved on and have had several different relationships within the Karate Kid movies. So yeah, ultimately, like he just eventually just kept finding other love interests and stuff like that, and stuff didn't always work out. But if anything, the show also reflects on that, and I thought that that was fairly interesting. And this and that. So when going into this show, I thought that it was very interesting. I thought it was very interesting to see a villain's perspective of kind of the very first movie, and also like having you root for the villain in this show via a lot of perspectives, trying to have Johnny's character ultimately be this like drunken schlob in the beginning of this show, but ultimately eventually he wants to turn his life around. He wants to eventually try to um he wants to try to be he wants to try to be a better person, not just a better uh karate dojo coach. Within this show, we have it to where ultimately the villain is the person you have to invest in. And ultimately, they do a very good job of really presenting a way of kind of eventually turning you to sympathize with the Cobra Kai characters up into a certain point. But then again, you're just like, yeah, but I still want to invest in Cobra Kai. I still want to invest in all these people. I still want to um I still want to buy into Cobra Kai. Like I just can't easily take the LaRusso path, and I can't quite easily just go like, yeah, but Daniel-san always is like his teachings are just better, and his teachings are not too like brutal, and his teachings were always just like um was just very like interesting in this and that, and was always fun to watch. Man, Cobra Kai, man, there is some very much like his teachings instill confidence in his people, but then I ultimately think that his teachings are really just like, whoa, okay, like but there's a lot of times where there's simply like a lot of Johnny stuff. It's like he doesn't. have a care in the world. Um, like a lot of the times when he's going about this, he's just kind of like, I don't quite know why exactly he's pushed into teaching karate again. He could ultimately have just freaking stayed on that couch or that bed or that whatever and just lived the rest of his life a drunken slob, and that's where he could have lived the rest of his life. I don't quite know exactly the real reason why he got out of this drunken stupor and why like he was driven to ultimately do all the things that he does. Was it just to rekindle his childhood? Was he having a midlife crisis at this point? Like, I don't exactly quite understand what drives Johnny Lawrence's character. Um, but I also don't quite exactly understand what LaRusso's drive is into this season either. Because it seems like he lives a life of being a winner, and I guess with Cobra Kai being remastered or rebooted or remade or whatever to this, to having some kind of Cobra Kai building being presented, he is all of a sudden starting to realize that he is not the winner that he thought he was, or that he is starting to see that he has some kinks in his armor. He's starting to see that he is ultimately um just like, god, this is never going away. Like, I'm not just going to be like living a full happy life. No, there's got to be something coming out of the woodwork, and there's some kind of injustice or kind of way of which I don't want things to be presented out in the world. And yeah, he just starts to like see all of his faults and all of his flaws and all of his kind of things kind of approach to him and this and that. But yeah, it seems like the entire world wants these two people to get back together and be in a room with one another and eventually um, combat one another at some point. Because at every time it seems like they are both barking dogs that like just are held together by chains, and eventually these chains are going to wear down, these chains are going to break, and like that's kind of what this show is ultimately about. It's more than just Johnny Lawrence kind of putting his life together. It's more about LaRusso trying to find his balance and his peace again. It's like, okay, like they both need to be able to kind of forgive their past, forgive their wrongdoings and their mistakes that they didn't realize up until uh things became too late and this and that. So because ultimately they do seemingly on a lot of this show have to drudge up the past, and they ultimately have to like give you a real eye opener on Johnny's story and why like he honestly could have been the villain in the Karate Kid movies just because he didn't have a good past himself. More than likely Johnny and LaRusso could almost be one and the same if you were to have just like ultimately like looked at it from a perspective. I like how it broke down Johnny's story from the first movie and kind of made LaRusso look like a villain. I thought that that was actually funny. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about perspective and looking at it. I liked how it like towards more the end of this there was a very much like Romeo and Juliet kind of story brewing between um between these two groups that ultimately like there had to be some love interest, but the love interest ultimately is just like, well yeah, I'm on the Cobra Kai side, well yeah, I'm on the LaRusso side, or the Bonsai side, I guess we could ultimately say, and or the Miyagi side. And so it's like, well, hey, like it's too bad that like this is really putting a wrench in between us because we were so good together and this and that. Anyways, so let's get into very much a non spoiler s like version of the show. I liked it. I liked how reasonably we we almost in a lot of ways did a remake or a reboot of the very first Karate Kid movie. But it was also a sequel, but it felt like a remake. It felt like a reboot. Much more so, but um than an actual like it cuz it didn't like you can kind of really ultimately say that like there was a lot of stuff that felt like filler even though it felt important, um just to eventually get us to like invest in either Cobra Kai or LaRusso if eventually you get to a point where you kind of transition. But anyways, I thought both kind of teachings ultimately could be broken down as being like both valid. I think there's something about just blatantly doing some of the stuff that Johnny does, but for some people that like Johnny coaches the right people. Johnny coaches the people that definitely need his teachings. So justifiably, Johnny's right in a lot of ways. And I that's what I think up until a certain point, where his teachings go too far and his teachings get manipulated by his own students, and then he's just like, like yeah, but like I said this, but his teachings get manipulated, and it's like anyways, so let's go into spoilers about this show. I thought it was a good show. I thought it was a solid overall remaking of this because ultimately it doesn't really quite exactly feel like a sequel to me, even though it has to be. It just doesn't quite feel like it when you kind of break it down. It feels much more so like a reboot. It feels like a remake, but adding in the, of course, people from the original movies and or the original films and stuff like that. So let's go out of our way to spoil this show. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. I wouldn't go out of my way to say it was a bad show. I actually really very much liked it. As far as I don't quite feel it exactly teaches a lot of like karate. Like I don't think it actually goes in the show and actually teaches you, like it kind of teaches you like basic positioning and stuff like that, but after that it just kind of really doesn't really teach people any like karate. It just kind of goes into like the almost barbaric way of which Johnny teaches, but I kind of really do appreciate it because ultimately Johnny teaches the right kids to ultimately be Cobra Kai. So we have it ultimately to where Johnny at first is kind of just being a drunken slob, going and looking and reminiscing about his past. Ultimately, going into his car with him being fully blitzed, probably drunk off his who knows what, driving around, ultimately looking at his past, and ultimately looking at where he had lost. Giving us a little bit of insight of what had happened after Johnny had lost in the first film. Telling us that Johnny had to win or nothing else mattered, especially to his coach, to where his coach grabbed him and was almost going to choke him out. I'm like, good God. It's like, God, like, Johnny must have been just so, when he was younger and had to fight LaRusso, God, was he, like, with how that coach was so driving him to almost be like, not only was this kid burdened by a horrible stepfather, but then on top of that, he was seeking a father in this this dojo karate teacher, and this teacher goes and chokes him out. God, that would really just like, I bet that really messed up Johnny to where I can understand why he is this drunken slob at the beginning of this show, because it's like this was Johnny's one moment, and everything was taken from him supposedly. If his father hadn't been taken from him, then his shortly thereafter his girlfriend was taken from him, and then right after that the love of his coach was taken from him, and just take. Eventually trying to actually find love and eventually have a son, like having his wife eventually leave him and just kind of take his son and have complete custody was maybe another just take from him. So I can really understand why Johnny is wanting to go back in time to revisit that moment and just win, because everything was taken from him since I don't know how long. And so he wanted to take back Cobra Kai. And to where if no one was going to if no one was going to ultimately give him what he needs to ultimately be the guy that he was several decades ago, then and kind of pick up the pieces, then he needed to do it himself. So we have ultimately just Johnny Lawrence ultimately going and looking at putting up a Cobra Kai dojo. All the while his car gets smashed into, leading to this car being sent to some dealership. And Johnny's like, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want to go to this dealership because the dealership is LaRusso's dealership. It supposedly has the best deals and this and that, and every time somebody makes a sale or something like that, you get a bonsai tree, which was like, oh my god, yeah, we're really and truly going back into the bonsai tree thing. and really like bringing that back. I'm like, good. Like, yeah, I really like that they really put a lot of care into um, mentioning about LaRusso and having him have a car dealership. I'm like, God, that is so perfect because the several uh amounts of time where you just see like you had Mr. Miyagi with all these stacks of cars all around him, like it really does make sense for to have Daniel-san to ultimately be a used car dealer and this and that. So we have it to where ultimately Johnny is going and trying to get his car, and he is hearing that Larusso is possibly going to come out and ultimately see one of the people. And Johnny's like, "Oh my god! Like I do not want to see Larusso again. Like I do not want to reminisce. I don't want to talk to this guy at all. I want him. I want to be a ghost to him." And so ultimately, Johnny is trying to scramble to ultimately get his car, or he's going to leave and ultimately come back tomorrow. Surefire enough, there is absolutely no way that LaRusso is going to leave without speaking to Johnny. And of course, LaRusso has his kind of family there, ultimately to just kind of just be like, oh, hey, who is this guy? And kind of bring up the fact that ultimately, yeah, like LaRusso did beat him and did kick him in the face and this and that, and Johnny's just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I'm here for my car. Like I'm not here to have you mention to me how I lost before. Cuz he's lost so much on his entire lifespan that to have LaRusso gloat about it is just like, great. This is all I needed for my day. Like, this is great. So LaRusso ultimately is like kind of like realizing that it's like, yeah, Johnny, you really don't want to be here. You don't want to see me. Hey, like, yeah, like this is all in the past and whatever, and like having to drudge it up right in front of you. Like he probably felt bad about it. So he's like, you know what? Like, how about I just have this car or whatever? Like, it seems like the car is the damages are more than the car is actually worth. But he's like, you know what? Hey, like I will negate all that and just kind of like pay for all the work, and it'll be on me. Because ultimately, I kind of found out. I kind of felt like the Russo like felt bad about like having to drudge up that he beat him before. It's like, hey, how about I just take care of it and let you be on your way? Because ultimately, you just don't want to be here. And like Johnny's just like, okay, great. And eventually they leave. And ultimately, funny enough, the reason why Johnny's car was damaged was because of LaRusso's daughter being involved in the car, of course. And ultimately, he assumed that seeing her later is like, ah, LaRusso tried to damage my car. Like everything is tied to these people, whether it's the son of said person or it's the person themselves. There's just this like there's this magnet between these two, and I think it's just amazing to see these pieces come together. And so ultimately, we have Johnny, who of course has a son. He has a son, and ultimately, I don't think he's ever really been there for him, or it doesn't seem that way. Ultimately, if they have flashbacks where maybe Johnny really actually was there, but his son didn't know. So we have it to where ultimately Johnny's son is ultimately going into almost being a thug at some point. He is like stealing from people, or he's going down a very dangerous path, and almost being a villain in a lot of sense. And ultimately, he decides that he ultimately wants to he ultimately wants to do something good. He wants to change his life, just like his father. And where Johnny chose to come back to Cobra Kai and teach people, his seemingly first student, it seems like he's really drilling into this kid to be very confident. Like, hey, strike first means that you're trying to control what is going on, um, instead of being the punching bag to someone else. I can understand, yeah, I can understand everything that he's doing, and like I really enjoy the very much montage of him trying to consistently try to teach this kid, where they have like freaking baseballs being shot at him through this like pitching thing, and he's like trying to dodge it, and it's like, oh my god, this is just like dodgeball. But anyways, um, we go into this, and we have it to where everything is being the exact, trying as hard to be the exact opposite of LaRusso, where ultimately, every single time this kid is doing some task, he's always asking, like, oh, should I be cleaning this a certain way? Should I be trying to do this a certain way? This and that. And of course, Johnny goes, I don't care. Like, just do it however you want. Like, where when we have it, when ultimately we have the change of when Johnny's son wants to ultimately change his stripes and ultimately be a, like, he doesn't want to be a eventual person that is just going to end up in handcuffs. He wants to just stick it to his dad by working with LaRusso. And ultimately Johnny's son ultimately does his job and actually does it really, really well. And like it's such like a weird, like it's such a weird thing where I think eventually this kid ultimately goes into this job and realize how well he can do it. And that is actually kind of like making him maybe go like, wow, like I've really like you know what, like at first I was just trying to stick it to my old man, but then when actually doing this job I was like, it really seems like he was really trying, and he really wanted to like achieve something. He had goals and stuff like that, and it really just bizarrely just turned into just like, you know what, yeah, I did this as a like a joke before, but you know what, I really like I really am just enjoying this now. And then bizarrely, when LaRusso's kind of cousins or whatever are kind of like treating this kid like crap, because ultimately it's just like, oh yeah, he's doing things so well around here, like I gotta put like I really gotta put a stife into this guy, or kind of get under his craw and get him in trouble, so it makes him look bad. We have it to where the kid just eventually doesn't realize what he's doing until it's too late, and LaRusso just kind of goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so the kid just like walks off, and he's like, "Yeah, I know. I probably got in some kind of trouble because I didn't know any better." To where LaRusso ultimately like confronts him and is like, "Hey, like maybe there was a mistake there," and freaking like Johnny's son was almost gonna punch LaRusso out, and funny enough, like LaRusso ultimately teaches him how to punch somebody in the face better. Which I thought was funny. Like he was almost gonna swing at him because he wasn't sure about like, so, and LaRusso teaches him how to like definitely like punch perfectly. So ultimately um so that way he, like, if he is gonna swing at him, it's like, hey, you don't want to break your hand or whatever, like do it the right way and this and that. And I thought that that was kind of funny. I'm like, God, LaRusso is so nice in this show. God, it is like Ralph Macchio. Like, God, is he so nice in the show? Like, I really like how, like, out of his way he goes to, like, eventually do things. Um, I really enjoy that. So, we have it to where, ultimately, um, Johnny is consistently, like, having to like sublet his dojo to like a yoga class and this and that, just trying to barely skate by because eventually the Russo ends up buying the strip mall that Johnny's in to double the rent. So ultimately, Johnny would give up on this whole Cobra Kai thing, and eventually. LaRusso is consistently trying to put screws into Johnny doing this whole Cobra Kai thing, but Johnny won't give up. Ultimately, when looking at it, he's looking at like, well, hey, like I want to re-enter the tournament, of course, that me and Larusso had before. Like I want to enter this tournament, and supposedly Cobra Kai was banned from this tournament, and Johnny's like, well, why? Like, like this isn't the exact same Cobra Kai that was years ago. We're a different Cobra Kai. So it gets to the point to where if there isn't this back and forth tit for tat thing going on, we have LaRusso who ultimately has a daughter who ultimately is fairly well trained in karate. And I'm just like, oh, okay, is she gonna be his descendant? Is she gonna be the new Daniel-san? Is she gonna be freaking the the girl that enters the tournament and beats Cobra Kai or gets pretty close? Because ultimately I feel like there is some real true friction going on between Johnny's student who is ultimately falling in love with LaRusso's daughter. All the while, eventually, this show turns into a love triangle almost. And I'm like, oh wow, I'm kind of interested in like where this is all going. Because eventually it seems like Johnny's biological or whatever son is actually very much winning this LaRusso's girl over as well. But Johnny's son didn't tell LaRusso that who his father was. And so eventually it comes ahead to where eventually LaRusso finds out that Johnny's son is working for him, and he thought there was some kind of con or some kind of dirty task or whatever that Johnny was trying to drudge up, and really it wasn't. It really wasn't. It was just a coincidence that Johnny's son wanted to be a part of LaRusso's life and this and that. LaRusso, or Johnny's son, ultimately gets taught in the ways of LaRusso, or in a lot of ways, Mr. Miyagi. The ghost of Mr. Miyagi is very much like showcased into this show, and I like how they kind of very much try to like give him a tribute in this show. But anyways, we get to the point of Johnny's teachings. Johnny's teachings, of course. Having like of course the outcasts or the nerds or the otherwise um students that really have been picked on a lot at school be his students, and a lot of the high rich kids that are ultimately picking on those nerdy kids are could be in question a lot of what LaRusso is kind of connected to, or LaRusso's daughter. So funny enough, it's kind of a very much twist and turn of things via the life of which you live. So Johnny's teachings are very interesting Because you have to where all these nerdy kids that are kind of flinchers and kind of really very much like scared to be hit. Johnny goes out of his way to go, okay, well, every single one of you kids are gonna get learned up or whatever on how to get a punch in the face. And all the kids are like, say what? Like, every one of these kids are gonna get punched in the face. So that way they don't flinch anymore, they know what's coming, and they know it hurts. Even if they get a broken nose or whatever, it is what it is, because ultimately they need to learn to not be flinchers. They need to know, yeah, getting hit in the face hurts, but once you get hit in the face once, he's going to train you on how to block it so you never get hit again. So, but all the while also giving these kids confidence. But eventually we get to where Johnny's really like key like student eventually goes to a Halloween party and of course wears the skeleton costume that Johnny wore before. It seems like Johnny is really passing down a lot of his stuff to this kid, to his star pupil, and I'm just like man, this is so wrong because Johnny actually has an actual son and he's not passing down any of this stuff to where like Johnny's actual son is just like this is really rubbing me the wrong way because I'm seeing that Johnny has what is questionably a quasi new son. And so his actual son is just like, no, I'm gonna go and teach, be taught by frickin' LaRusso, your villain, or in your eyes, your villain, and uh, and then just be taught the good way, I guess, to the light side of the force, I guess, if you want to go about Star Wars terms and this and that. But anyways, Johnny is teachings is very unconventional, but it establishes confidence. It gets to where people are his kids are in a junkyard and are breaking and smashing a bunch of stuff in a junkyard, but then eventually they have to learn to be quick on their feet because there's a lot of dogs going ahead and just chasing after them. So they have to defend themselves or ultimately be quick on their feet to ultimately dodge these dogs that are coming at them. A lot of weird teachings and stuff like that, but when looking at it almost in a lot of karate movies, there is quasi some of these scenes kind of in a lot of other karate films and this and that. Anyways, so we have it to where ultimately Johnny is consistently bashing these kids, kind of bringing up their faults, mentioning to them like there is a guy with a cleft lip, and he keeps calling him Lippy or Lip or something like that, and the kid ultimately gets like to the point of just being so uncomfortable that he's like, "Don't call me that," and but the teacher keeps on like bringing it up, bringing it up, bringing it up, to where ultimately the kid runs off. But then eventually the next day, he freaking comes back with a freaking mohawk and a freaking tattoo on his back. And for then the rest of the show, he's called Hawk. And ultimately, like showcasing that, yeah, this kid has has a cleft lip or whatever, but that drove him to stand out in a different way regardless. Like, hey, if people are going to see me, they're going to see my mohawk before anything else. And really driving Hawk to be a much more confident person, to the point of just like I'm sick of people treating me one way. Well, I'm going to freaking just be more confident because I like this thing that is making everybody laugh and joke at me. I'm gonna freaking turn this negative into a positive, and then also just be like, I don't care. But towards the very end of the show, it like, this guy, this kid, But anyways, we ultimately have it to where Johnny's son is being taught by Lorenzo because it seems like Lorenzo is just trying to desperately try to find somebody to do karate with. He's like, come on, like I just want to have somebody to just do karate with and teach somebody and this and that. Where eventually he finds that in Johnny's son. So we eventually have it to where Johnny's star pupil is dating um, Lorenzo's daughter, and eventually, when it comes to the Romeo and Juliet moment, where both of these people know that because of who they are ultimately kind of tied to, that they can't be together. Driving in a wedge of Johnny's star pupil goes to Lorenzo's house and sees that his girlfriend is sitting next to Johnny's son, and also Daniel, Lorenzo, and this and that, and the entire family. And he's like, and he feels very defeated because he's like, like I wanted to be that person um that is at that dinner table, that is ultimately meeting uh Lorenzo and the whole entire family. Like I wanted to be that guy, but it seems like she's all of a sudden becoming cozy with this other guy. And probably the reason why she was so distant could have seemingly been that she had another like man in the stable, but that isn't actually at all true. It's just that Lorenzo had a just guy in the stable, and that guy otherwise kind of was starting to win Lorenzo's daughter over a little bit here and there. But anyways, it gets to the point. Let's get to the more interesting part. We get Daniel Russo and Johnny consistently butting heads for all this. If LaRusso wasn't trying to ban Cobra Kai from going into the tournament, which ultimately was overturned and Cobra Kai could participate in the tournament, then after that, like LaRusso's cousin was burning down Johnny's car with some biker gang. And Johnny had to confront LaRusso about this and like, hey, your family was trying to burn my car. And he's like, what's going on? And then ultimately Johnny was telling the story. He's like, oh yeah, like that, like I didn't tell them to do that, but they just did that. And so it's like, well, your family, your problem. And now it's my problem because now I don't have a car. So they ultimately had to get in his car. It was a Charger, of course, another like old fashioned car, and talk about music and talk about like old times and talk about the girlfriend of course from the first karate films, and like reminisce about whatever happened to her and this and that. And I was like, man, this is really kind of good to try to put this person in here if she couldn't actually be on the show. You actually had to like tell us a kind of a closure thing of this character, and I thought that that was all well and good. But ultimately, they ultimately just kind of said it's like, well, like I know things about her, but ultimately, like I'm not gonna go out of my way to try to be friends with her because ultimately, like I don't feel right about it, and this and that. So they they kind of talked about old past and old flames and this and that and had a drink with one another, if not having kind of breakfast before and this and that. But we get to the contest. We get to the contest. Let's kind of bash into that. So we have it to where Johnny's son is just going and being an independent person upon his own, just being on the contest regardless. And we of course have Cobra Kai and Johnny, who of course is They're just going about this competition and just like, yeah, we're in the competition now. Ultimately, we're we're seeing the wins and losses of eventually Cobra Kai, and I'm like, oh yeah, I really invested in this character, and I wanted her to win or really get to the finals or this and that. Um, like Hawk was seemingly beating easily everybody, but then ultimately he disqualified himself. I'm like, oh, so he's that kid that sweep the leg and ultimately gets disqualified out because there has to be that kid. And we also eventually have Johnny's star pupil that is ultimately just beating everybody. And so eventually we have it down to the fact where Johnny's son is like just independently just working on his own, and eventually he gets it to where his shoulder is dislocated. And so we get LaRusso coming in there and he's like, hey, like I guess I should really teach him now, and ultimately you should tell him like he should focus and this and that, and like really just go like, hey, like no matter what, like I want to be like behind this kid because like there's nobody here for him, or his father isn't going to be behind him, so F it, like I'm going to be. Um and this and that. Kind of really cementing that like hey, like this kid ultimately kind of relents that like it wasn't a con, it wasn't some ruse. It's like ultimately just like it just worked out. Like I didn't have a father, so you were the closest thing to a father to me, and this and that. And it's like, oh, okay, like I can understand and this and that. So we have till Russo ultimately does the like slapping the hands and rubbing the hands together, and ultimately going to be doing the Mr. Miyagi trick to heal the kid. But then he stops and he's like, "Medic, medic!" like, I'm sorry, only Mr. Miyagi knew that trick, and I knew Daniel was not going to all of a sudden bizarrely crank that trick out. So ultimately, you have a medic come in there, and she pops the shoulder back in, and the kid gets back in there. Ultimately, just desperately wanting to win, either the approval of his father or just like, hey, like I wanted to I wanted to just do this, and LaRusso wasn't my real true reason for doing this whole thing. It was just like I found something in doing this, like learning this whole karate, and I had to see this all the way to the end. Um, and LaRusso was just like, well, like I should be doing that too. And so ultimately he goes and says that like, yeah, I'm his teacher, I'm his trainer, like he's gonna be under my dojo and this and that. Uh then we have the final fighting of Johnny's star pupil and LaRusso's star pupil, and of course his daughter doesn't fight, but it seems like at the very end of this season, it seems like his daughter was going to start training again, which I'm like, ooh, like hopefully she actually starts actually like wanting to fight, because I think that'll actually be really cool. Because I think that's like her driving force was seeing her friend that is ultimately with Cobra Kai, and she's like, you know what, like, yeah, like I really like this girl and she likes to fight, so why don't I fight? And this and that. It's just kind of like a driving force, kind of sort of. So we ultimately have the competition between the two who ultimately were winning over the one girl, where she ultimately leaves because she didn't want to see both of these two fight it out. This kind of turns almost to a Twilight situation almost, but anyways, we have them fight out, and it seems like Johnny's star pupil is ultimately seeing a weakness in LaRusso's star pupil, mentioning the shoulder, and Johnny is looking at him. He's like, "Yeah, but I don't really want you to. I don't want. That's my kid. Like, I don't want you to hurt my son." And he's like really like having a really hard time coaching his pupil, but because he's looking at his son from the other side of the ring that is like really struggling to like fight. Like he's really like he's just stubbornly like I am going to do this, and Johnny's like looking back at just like yeah, but that's my son. That's my son. Um, but anyways, the Lorenzo Star Pupil fights as hard as he can, but he can't fight with a messed up shoulder. And so the Cobra Kai team wins. And I was like, okay, well, like, it's 1-1 now. Like, the rubber match is on. Like, yeah, Lorenzo won the first time, but now Cobra Kai has won. So now, really, Lorenzo is kind of like, okay, well, I'm like I'm really gonna go back and do this. Like I'm really gonna teach people and I'm gonna get up my numbers and this and that. I'm really gonna go back into this and because like I feel the itch again. I feel that I really want to teach again and I feel I feel I want to really uh have like I really feel that Cobra Kai dishonored karate. So I'm gonna go back and put some honor back into it. And eventually I'm assuming that Daniel and Johnny are gonna fight once again at some point. So and they kind of mentioned that like why not have it just be kind of like a street brawl, kind of like one of the other Rockies was. And it's like F it, like we don't have to do this like a legitimate way or this and that. Like, if you want to fight, like, let's do it wherever and this and that. So, I feel that that at some point is eventually going to get to that point where they just ultimately have to have this be a fight out and this and that. So, anyways, we have it to where we showcase that Mr. Miyagi's home was here all along within this show and the ultimate showcase bringing back to this home and I'm like okay this is awesome like really cementing that like these things still do exist and they're in perfect working condition or and this and that and like of course some of the cars of course from the Karate Kid and of course some of the house that seemed to be very much like a set piece from the other Karate Kid movie they try to re-bring that back and showcase it here on the show ultimately knowing full well that it's like okay we're really putting some real money towards the end of this show to let people know it's going to be a season 2. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Um, really interesting. Really kind of cementing that they're really going to go full bore with this, and they're really going to put some real serious money into this show and this and that, kind of bringing back the actual movie and uh not just kind of like half-ass it or whatever. So at the end of the day, I liked the twists and turns that the way this show goes, but we also have a season 2, so hopefully there's no spoilers because eventually I'm going to see season 2 as soon as possible to eventually see where season 2 goes because of course Johnny's teacher is back in the Cobra Kai dojo and is like, "Well, hey, like yeah, we finally won." And he reapproaches and he's like, yeah, we're back in business kind of thing. And it's like, dude, like, you choked this guy out before. How are you going to ultimately, like, I think that this is going to drive Johnny out of his own Cobra Kai teachings. And it's going to drive him to team up with LaRusso and I can't think of it being business as usual. I just can't. So Anyways, it'll be very interesting to see where season 2 gets off and where we ultimately are really going full ride with all this, and ultimately having like Lorenzo's character have a maybe a ton of students against Cobra Kai, and we're really gonna have a full out war of all this, and it's gonna be crazy. So yeah, I like the show, but I think it's my time to go here. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it's like it was fairly slow. It was fairly kind of rehashing a lot of stuff, and but I thought it was overall just a good story. I thought it was overall just yeah, I like this so far that I want to see where season 2 goes. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.